Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. We got a World War III alert. Nuclear India versus nuclear Pakistan. Let's dig into it. Before we get into it, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Let's get into the content. Exactly what's happening is nuclear war here.
In the first confrontation of this magnitude, Indian Air Force lost 5 fighter jets in a single night, while Pakistan did not lose a single aircraft. Pakistani Defense Minister Khawaja Mohammad Asif reported on his official account on May 7th in a clear message to India. According to the Defense Minister, this was reportedly in retaliation for Indian recent missile strikes, which targeted locations in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Pakistan has closed its airspace for the past 48 hours in retaliation against India. The cruise missiles allegedly launched by Pakistan, flying towards targets in Indian-occupied Kashmir, are now on fire. Military analysts now say that Pakistani retaliation appears to be on a larger scale than Indian initial attack. Footage shows an Indian strike on the town of Bawalpur, near the border, early this morning on May 7th. Indian aircraft reportedly dropped fuel tankers on frontline positions in Kashmir, claiming to be prepared for continued fighting, amid rising tensions in a significant escalation of hostilities. Both India and Pakistan are nuclear powers. A rapid escalation could turn into a disaster at any time. New footage from the village of Aklian Kalan in Indian Punjab province shows the wreckage of an Indian-French Rafale multi-role fighter jet, surrounded by curious locals seeking a glimpse of the scene. It is the third Rafale to be shot down by Pakistani forces, according to a Pakistani military spokesman. The video shows the remains of the aircraft, which appears to be a Rafale, armed with French Mica air-to-air missiles, still attached to its launcher. Meanwhile, an unconfirmed report said that a Pakistani counterattack may have brought down the Indian helicopter in Kashmir. Pakistani troops are carrying out indiscriminate firing along the border, the Indian Defense Ministry spokesman complained. Meanwhile, Pakistani military spokesman detailed Indian losses, saying at least 3 Rafale fighter jets, 1 Sukhoi 30 Mki, and 1 MiG-29S were shot down. There are unofficial reports of 1 Mirage 2001 Indian UAV, also shot down by Pakistan, and reportedly captured several Indian soldiers. Pakistani Defense Ministry has said, if India attacks and Pakistani existence is threatened, no one will be safe. We will not allow any other country to live on this planet. Pakistani Defense Minister has confirmed that at least 3 civilians, including 1 child, have been killed after India launched a missile attack on Pakistani territory. Reports say at least 30 people have been reported killed in Bawalpur, Pakistan. There is widespread chaos in hospitals, and internet blackouts are likely in the region. The world is on the brink of the most dangerous confrontation in South Asia in decades. India must urgently find a mediator to end the fighting with Pakistan before its entire air force goes up in smoke.
She's amazing. Go to moinkbox.com/IM because I'm just telling the food is so damn good. And then like the one night you made the chicken thighs.
The roast chicken.
Oh, sorry, you're muted. So the roast chicken thighs.
Yeah.
We were like, holy smokes.
No, it's just a full butchered chicken. I just put the whole thing in the oven with butter, and it was the freshest chicken ever. It was delicious.
So delicious.
Yep.
Yeah.
The wings are good too. I can vouch for the steaks too.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
Steaks are amazing. The bacon's amazing. I'm telling you, just try it. Just give it a shot. I mean, it's great if you want to support American farms. All right. So let me get this straight. 2 weeks ago, millions of people in Spain were plunged into total darkness, total blackout, no power, no. Yeah. Breaking news. Life Sages. See, I'm usually with you on this. Like Life Saga says, here's breaking news on the BBC. Nothing's going to happen.
Oh, I like this comment. I think Clayton and Natalie are fighting because whenever she talks, you for the West. There's not even
needs to be careful not to get in the way. You never trust.
Trump speaking just a short time ago saying he hopes that the
into it. So now that we have scientists knowing, doctors understanding that, hey, this may not be the best thing for kids, don't worry, AI will step in. This is terrifying, and we're going to show it to you so that you can keep your kids away from it.
Yeah, a lot of people in the chat saying, "What the f? Please, no."
Yes.
Yeah. First it was TikTok grooming children. With all of these sort of the algorithm pushing.
Yeah.
It's okay. Just become trans. Just pushing that whole agenda on people. Yeah. Now it's beyond the algorithm.
AI will totally tell you, cut off your boobs, you'll be fine. That's what it says. We're going to show it to you, and you're going to freak out, and then you're going to have a talk with your kids about not believing anything AI says. They are not your friend.
Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. But first, let's talk about this. This isn't just a border dispute right now between India and Pakistan. They are now at war. Make no mistake about it. Moments ago, India launched a new round of attacks. Pakistan says it's readying a massive response. Last night, of course, India launching a barrage of attacks. After that terrorist attack about a week and a half ago in Kashmir, here were the few moments that set off this latest round of attacks. Watch. Patrick in our chat says it is bad this time. Sylvia says Pakistan is fully controlled by the United States. So a lot of conflicting opinions about exactly what is happening right now and how bad this will actually get. This is decades of tension, pride, nuclear risk, all rolled into this. Drew Berquist is a former counterterrorism officer and the host of This Is My Show with Drew Berquist, and he joins us now. Drew, great to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, guys.
So we heard the President Trump speaking just a short time ago, saying he hopes that the tensions on this will end quickly. But if you're watching the sort of minute-to-minute movements right now on both sides, this doesn't appear to be ending quickly anytime soon. What do you make of this latest round of developments between India and Pakistan?
Well, it's concerning. Obviously, look, a lot of people look at situations like this overseas and don't tend to care a whole lot. Who cares what's going on with India and Pakistan? They've always been fighting each other. But that's part of the problem, too, is they've been fighting forever and a day, with multiple incursions like this one that just kicked off. There's 1999, there's 2016, 2019, and then all sorts of little ones in between. But you see this, and as the world changes and gets, more and more dangerous and different alliances on the side start to form, that's where it gets more concerning. Obviously, they're both nuclear capable countries, but you just don't want to see right now, particularly where other conflicts in the nearby region are going nuts with what Israel is dealing with Yemen and with Iran. We just need less war, not more war. And this right here is one that could pop off in a way that no one wants.
Now, Pakistan denies that it had anything to do with the terrorist attack last week. So could it be factions inside of Pakistan that the government cannot control, given the fact that, Pakistan, we did not see them have free and fair elections recently. How much can we trust what comes out of either side?
You never trust anything Pakistan says. And if there's someone in the audience who's offended by that, I'm so sorry for you. But look, we've given money to these guys forever and a day, which is a whole nother conversation. But we, the United States and other allies, have given money to Pakistan. And that money has funneled its way down through ISI and into terror groups. I mean, we've literally, in all the multiple deployments that I had and my colleagues had overseas, we were paying Pakistan and then indirectly terror groups to then come kill us. It's never made any sense. So the way that they have it kind of isolated off, I'm sure there's some decent politicians over there, but the system is so corrupt. So to say that there's no connection, we don't have any connection with whether it's Lash or Jaish or any of the different terror groups there, it's just patently absurd. There's the amount of corruption that happens there. And I know it's not just Pakistan, that happens elsewhere. And I'm not saying India is perfect in this either, but for them to make some of the claims that they've made, distancing themselves from terror and funding and some of the things that are going on there they're just ridiculous.
I think it's important to point out, I think Mike Benz was pointing this out not too long ago on social media, and kind of took some flack for it. And then he went back and sort of just explained more deeply why you have a prime minister in Pakistan that really just can handle sort of regional politics, but it's really the military industrial complex that fully runs Pakistan. Can you maybe elaborate on that? They're totally in control. It's not your elected leaders.
Absolutely. It's their mill, and it's ISI, which is their intelligence service, the equivalent of CIA in Pakistan, that run everything, and they're dirty. I mean, they're so dirty. For example, I can't say the particulars of an operation. We were tracking someone, a top 5 AQ person at the time, found them there. The way we found them was remarkable, but that'll have to be over drinks sometime, not here. And we literally had to pay $1 million. We had to bribe people that we were already paying to be able to execute the operation there, so they wouldn't tip people off. I mean, it's just such a nasty thing. They control information. They control the flow of money, which again trickles down to all sorts of different groups. That trickle down to Lash and Jaish, who are more specifically focused up in the Kashmir region, typically, but it went to the Haqqani network and all these different groups. So the prime minister is just a figurehead position that needs to be careful not to get in the way of the departments beneath he or she.
Do you think that's what happened to Imran Khan? That's why they don't have a real leader?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say for certainty when it comes to him, but it makes sense with everything historically that we've ever dealt with in that region, in particular with that country. Like, I would never want that job. It's just, right. You don't want to be in that position because you have no power. You're just trying to count the days that you can actually survive and hope that you do.
Now, because in that region, we know that U.S. intelligence told us that there was no real way to win a war against the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. And we did it anyway, and we got involved. What is the U.S. position here? What should we do? I mean, obviously, no one wants to see nuclear war, but we don't know how. Like you made the good point. People are like, "What do we have to do with it over there?" Well, because it's nuclear, right? And because we have interest there. So, what should we take from this?
Well, that's a good question, and it's a tough question, because the problem is we partner with both sides. We send money to both sides. We have deals and arrangements with both sides, which we typically do. We're notoriously bad at funding both sides of conflicts and or creating groups that we then will fight down the road. But with this, the tricky thing is, we don't want to be involved. We don't want it to scale to nuclear. And I don't think, to be clear, if I was a betting man, I wouldn't bet that that's going to go that far. But you don't want to risk it either. But us going there really changes nothing and getting involved. So it's got to be pressure from the big state actors. Putin's come out and said we shouldn't be doing this. Other countries, leaders and brass have come out and said, hey, you guys have got to just chill out over there, because no one wants this. And there is no good outcome. If everyone were to say, hey, okay, we're sending people over, or we're going to do X, Y, or Z things in the region, it's not going to change the outcome, because whether it's fighting, among tribes in Afghanistan and the different terror groups, or whether it's fighting between Pakistan and India over Kashmir and who gets to say it's theirs, you can't break these things down that way. Like, they just will not stop. Like, these conflicts are so deep rooted that you can hit the pause button, you can throw some money at it, but unfortunately, it's just not going anywhere.
To someone who's not followed this conflict for years, like you have, President Trump says he wants to be an arbiter here, sort of a mediator. He wants this to stop. He's going to be over there, in that region next week. He'll be close by anyway. He wants this to stop. What kind of leverage does the United States have here to try to put an end to this? What does President Trump have? What card does he have up his sleeve that he could pull?
Well, I mean, a lot of it's going to come through, you don't want us involved. I mean, having the peace through strength model, having Trump saying what he does, and then also having people be a little uncertain of what Trump will or will not do, obviously helps us in a lot of situations. I think that could be it. I think that there can be financial aspects of this as well, for both sides. India as well. There's talks of different India deals with the tariffs, the 0 for 0 tariffs this week, which was great news if it goes that way. But you've got some different levers you can pull on. But again, the problem is you've got Lashkar-e-Taiba in Pakistan, for example, who's one of the many terror groups that are there and are harbored, whose sole goal, I mean, these people, these jihadists, regardless of their home nation, they're hardcore. I mean, they're hard. Like, their goal is to not only take over Kashmir, but then to go on and eliminate all of India. So it's not like we can just come up with some sort of truce over the Kashmir region. You have this, you have that. We'll keep the border in between right now that they currently have, because it's just this next level jihad and this passion for them that you're never going to get out of. So maybe the prime minister of Pakistan, who doesn't have that big of a role, and maybe leadership in India can agree to a deal up here. But the problem is you're never going to get control of these groups operating on the ground, particularly on the Pakistan side.
The more you explain this, the more I'm convinced we can't do anything. It's not for the West. There's not even if I wanted to sell this war the way we sold the war in Ukraine, I don't know what the angle would be. So I feel like that's got to be the way we handle this going forward, is we pray, but that's about it.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. And that should always be the thing. And I think it's talking to some of the other world leaders too, calling, Vladimir up, calling, Xi up and saying, look, guys, let's all agree this is bad, because if Pakistan and China have a good relationship, India and Russian military have a good relationship, we have a relationship with both. None of us want this to scale. So let's tell them all to chill out, give them some coloring books, go sit in the color, think about what you've done, and let's not let this thing blow up. And if you decide to let it go crazy, just know that we're not coming to save the day and make this all right, because that's where it starts to get really nasty. Is not just the two of them fighting is terrible. And obviously we don't want it to scale to nuclear, but where it gets worse is when alliances and partners come into it. And that's what we want to avoid at all costs. So I think if we say, hey, look, that's just not happening, that's not on the table. So either you can get it together or you don't, but we're not helping.
Yeah, the United States may be staying out of a conflict for once. That'd be novel. That'd be exciting. Right? Just about an hour ago, the armed forces of Pakistan say they have been duly authorized to undertake corresponding actions and to respond. So it's a tit for tat right now, and of course, we hope that it doesn't spiral into nuclear war. Drew, great to see you. Drew Berquist, always great to see you. Thank you and yes, I would like some drinks sometime, and I'd like to hear about some of these opportunities.
and residential accommodation on 5 locations in Pakistan. And as per the initial reports, there are casualties, including women and children. The detailed damage assessment is being done, and Pakistan has a right to respond.
Wow. So we are potentially on an issue where we could be on the verge of a nuclear confrontation. And we're not talking about Russia and Ukraine or Russia and NATO. Now there's a new one on the horizon. Now, for the Western audiences, they may be surprised about this because there's some general understanding that Pakistan and India have some sort of long simmering animosity, but it's kind of been on the back burner, at least on the Western press. And honestly, with so many other things going on in the Middle East, in the Russia-Ukraine war, of course, that just absorbs all the space that we have for processing things. And then, by the way, periodically we can throw in the China-Taiwan issue and in the South China Sea, because that could also go into a nuclear confrontation, et cetera. So, boy, from the Western perspective, you don't really have any room for these other things. And of course, this has been simmering for a long time, really going all the way back to 1942, when India itself first declared independence, part of the Gandhi movement from Great Britain, from the British Empire. So that's where the seeds of this start. And before I really talk about what's actually going on the ground right now, I want to kind of give you a primer about where this came from. First of all, even this conflict here, which emerged because of a terrorist attack that happened on the Indian side of the Kashmir area, where 26 people were just brutally murdered by Islamist terrorists in that territory. So that happened in Kashmir. An Islamic group attacked Indian people, and then the Indian government retaliated. Okay, that's the general sequence of what happened right now. Here is a report from 2019, which sounds ominously similar.
The escalation comes after India launched an airstrike targeting a Pakistani terrorist camp. Foreign policy experts argue that the brewing conflict between the two nuclear-armed nations is not an isolated event and could have ripple effects impacting U.S. interests. One being Afghanistan, where the U.S. still has troops on the ground, and second is India's ability to take a leading role in broader Asian affairs. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo urging caution, asking both countries to exercise restraint and avoid any escalation at any cost. And it comes right ahead of India's general election.
Seema, does this shooting, these conflicts between the aircraft, date back to an attack by a radical terrorist group on Indian paramilitary officers, a suicide bombing a couple weeks ago?
A suicide bombing took place just about 2 weeks ago in the disputed region of Kashmir that resulted in 40 Indian soldiers being killed. And that's what really triggered this larger dispute that we're seeing take place between these two countries that have a long-standing rivalry that dates back to 1942 when India claimed independence.
Okay, so you see that there was a terrorist strike on the Indian side of Kashmir, and 40 Indian soldiers in that case were killed. And then the Indian side launched airstrikes against the Pakistani side, claiming that they were responsible for these terrorist attacks. You may have seen in the chyron on the bottom that 2 Indian jets were apparently shot down. There have been reports that either 2 or even up to 5 Indian jets last night were shot down. We still don't have confirmation of that, but that's what's being reported, or at least was last night. And then you had the U.S. Secretary of State talking to both sides, telling them they needed to calm down and to try to find a way out of this mess. That is almost exactly what's happened here. You had on I think it was the 26th of April, this last month, there was this time, instead of Indian military people, it was Indian civilians. It was actually tourists who were on there, because this is, oddly enough, an extremely beautiful countryside over there, and it's a big magnet for lots of tourism. Well, it's still unclear exactly what happened. It depends on who you ask, like so many of these things do. But there were some Islamic-based terrorists who murdered lots of these people, apparently requiring some of them to recite Quranic verses. And if they weren't able to do so, they were killed and slaughtered right there on the spot. So it was just a gruesome, horrible, I mean, we're talking civilian tourists. So obviously that's going to get a tremendous amounts of emotions up. What country could lose that many people and not do something? Well, of course, the Pakistani side says, well, it wasn't us. The government wasn't us. And the Indian side said, yes, it was. And then since that time, there's been lots of diplomatic arguments going back and forth. There's been lots of, almost nightly prior to this, there was gunfire between the two sides going back and forth, some artillery strikes going back and forth. So it was starting to build up with tensions, and a lot of things were getting angry. Both sides kept accusing the other of doing the wrong thing. Both sides said, we're innocent of anything, etc. And then finally, Pakistan or India came to the decision that they were going to launch strikes. They have allegedly lost anywhere from 2 to 5 aircraft. The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio last night said almost the identical thing that Pompeo said back in 2019. You know, we want to find a way out of this. We urge calm. We urge not to restrain, etc. But you have, at least at this moment in time, you have the Pakistani side saying, yeah, we're not going to be calm this time. And that is the problem. If this was an isolated event, then there would be more of a chance to top this down. But because nearly the same thing happened in 2019 and it wasn't resolved, it still has ripple effects and raw emotions on both sides of this from that unresolved issue there. Because at that time, the request for calm actually succeeded, and the thing largely fizzed out, and everything went back to kind of a status quo, an uncomfortable status quo, I guess you could say. But the history didn't start in 2019 either. And in that CNBC hit there a second ago, you saw them refer to this goes really the roots go all the way back to 1942 when India proclaimed its independence. But it actually, the animosity and the close proximity is of many of the actors in this area, and the rather contrasting cultures that are represented here goes back even further, as this primer from Professor James Kerr Lindsay shows.
Kashmir lies in South Asia on the south slopes of the Himalaya mountain range. Altogether, the area, which is now de facto partitioned between India, Pakistan, and China, is around 220,000 square kilometers or 86,000 square miles. Of this, India controls around 55%, Pakistan 35%, and China the remaining 10%. Altogether, the population is almost 20 million. Of this, around 13 million live in India and 6 million in Pakistan. The Chinese-controlled part, which was ceded by Pakistan to China in 1963, but is still claimed by India, is sparsely populated and mainly inhabited by military personnel. Kashmir has a long and rich history. However, our story really begins in the 19th century when it emerged as one of the 500 or so princely states within British-controlled India. This lasted until August 1947, when British rule finally ended and the country was partitioned between the Hindu-majority Dominion of India and the Dominion of Pakistan, a separate Muslim homeland formed to the north and east.
That's good enough, Gary. We can stop there. Yeah. So you see, this goes back a long time, and of course, as you may know, there used to be India, and then Pakistan broke off from India after they gained independence for Britain in 1947. And there was lots of animosity between the two. There's lots of bloodshed that has happened over years, lots of historical and generational anger and animosity between the two sides. And it's punctuated with periods of relative calm, uneasy calm, but then something happens. Well, one of the bigger things happened. India became a nuclear power first. And then you may recall with the famous A.Q. Khan, who got some of his capabilities from Iran and some other places. North Korea, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. North Korea, they got some of their help from A.Q. Khan in North Korea, and then they developed a nuclear weapon a couple of decades ago. And so now then that's just added to the tensions. But at one hand, it seemed like, all right, well, this is going to keep things calmed down, because now then they both have nuclear parity. So they can, one side, it's mutual assured destruction, even on a regional basis there. So that seemed that it might help calm things down. But it didn't, because actually it seems that it probably what it had the bigger impact of doing is actually giving more confidence to each side that maybe we can do even more in the Kashmir area, because everybody wants it. China has got 10%, so they're not an active player here in terms of trying to demand things. They haven't been involved with these to any large degree. So it's primarily between India and Pakistan. And so now that this particular one has been bubbling since 2019. And then this was just the latest spark. So when you get this tension that exists there, and that it was continued because there's all these little pot shots that keep happening and angry comments that keep going back and forth, it's kind of on a low boil. And then you get a big sparking event like this one, where there was 26 tourists that were murdered. Then obviously that's going to cause some real hardships. Now, when you want to look at this, and information control is a huge part of any conflict. We talk about this all the time in the Russia-Ukraine war, certainly in the Israeli-Hamas war, and all the situations that go along with that. Depends on who you ask what's really going on. And so for an American audience to try to figure out, well, who's right and who's wrong, it's really, really hard, because I'm going to show you the reaction from the two sides after this recent one here. And if you just listen to either one of these in isolation, you'll think, well, that seems pretty reasonable. I think he probably is right about what his country is doing. The problem is that there is one reality, but two very, very different views of it. Here first is the Indian Foreign Minister Misri announcing why they did this in the first place.
Earlier this morning, as you would be aware, India exercised its right to respond and preempt, as well as deter more such cross-border attacks. These actions were measured, non-escalatory, proportionate, and responsible. They focused on dismantling the terrorist infrastructure and disabling terrorists likely to be sent across to India. Our intelligence monitoring of Pakistan-based terrorist modules indicated that further attacks against India were impending. There was thus a compulsion both to deter and to preempt.
So you see, if that's all you listen to, you can think, wow, well, hey, they tried to solve this short of war or short of using violent action, but they had this information that the terrorists were about to do even more, and so their hands were tied, so they had to strike these positions here. That's if you listen to that side right there. But now then listen to the other side of this, where the Pakistani version, where they're saying about how little different.
Let us be absolutely clear. This was an unprovoked, deliberate act of war by India, who launched missile, drone, and air strikes into Pakistani territory. Over the past 2 weeks, Pakistan has been on the receiving end of belligerent threats by the Indian government. We have time and time again insisted that our hands are clean and offered an impartial inquiry to any and all accusations. Unfortunately, India rebuffed those offers by Pakistan and have chosen instead to target innocent civilians. Pakistan reserves the right under the UN Charter to respond.
So from the Pakistan side, wasn't a terrorist strike. It was an unprovoked attack by the Indians onto not terror infrastructure, not terrorist training camps, but just civilian areas. And the cameras that they put in there showed all kinds of houses and household items, et cetera, and a lot of the rubble, which they said proved that it was not a terrorist camp, et cetera. But here's the problem. The truth is going to be somewhere in between. Each side is going to promote itself as being telling the honest truth here, and the other side is distorting things. And they're both saying literally the same things in reverse. And look, from American perspective, this is not something we're going to solve. It's critical to understand, and I certainly hope the administration does, that this is not something that we're going to solve. What we can do is, because we are allied and have friendship with both sides, it is definitely in our interest to try and get the two sides to resolve this. What I would hope that would happen, the one thing the U.S. could do is to say, listen, Pakistan, we can't tell you not to react when your country was struck and killed and many of your citizens killed. Same thing with India, because they did lose some of theirs without question, and they lost a lot of their citizens that were murdered. So now then Pakistan has got it, and they're claiming, as you heard at the end of that clip, we will respond at a time of our choosing. Their prime minister and some of their other official statements, and he again repeated their very strong language at the first, we consider this an act of war. That implies that you're going to do something commensurate with what happens when an act of war is conducted on you, some kind of a big response. It would be in everybody's best interest that the United States at the very minimum would say, listen, just delay. Don't take action under emotions. Almost nothing good happens when you just take an emotionally feel-good moment and then do something right afterwards. Ask us and what we did after 9/11 and some of the actions that we took, which came back to haunt us many, many years later. And because things were taken with emotion, they weren't done soberly and with calculation designed to achieve a positive outcome and restore security and sanity without going so far that it caused, well, other wars, for example. We'll discuss that another time. But that is the situation that's facing Pakistan right now. They have had their people killed, and according to their version of it, they were all innocent. None of the people who were killed did anything wrong. And now then their sovereign territory was hit, and it was. But if we can delay any kind of an action for even a period, say a couple of weeks, for inquiries to be done, for going to want some kind of justice for what happened to their side. India did, Pakistan does. And the question is going to be what next? Because you see the Pakistan side, or the Indian side rather, is trying to say, hey, we're done. This is a done deal. We took appropriate, measured action that was non-escalatory, because that's what you want it to be. You want it to be non-escalatory because you want it to be over. And certainly the Pakistan side is not quite on the same sheet of music as that, because now the question is going to be whether Pakistan does delay for a while, they push it back, or whether they act in emotion in the near term. Either is possible. What's going to happen next? What will India do? Because likely the strike that Pakistan would do in response would be something probably commensurate, and maybe even more than that, to, quote, deter India from doing anything further. What would then the Indian government do? Seems unlikely that the 1.4 billion nation would take a hit commensurate with what they just inflicted there and then say, okay, fine, we're done now. You did to me, I did to you. All right, let's just move on. Then the risk comes that you get an escalation. Of course, with this situation here, this isn't even just like a Russia-Ukraine situation where one action leads to another. And you just got to look at the nation of 1.2 billion people, and then this relatively small nation that doesn't have 1.4 billion, whatever the number is, a lot. They can't get into a conventional fight because they can't win it. The Indian side has all the resources, the manpower, and everything else. So the tendency and the risk that you would resort to nuclear weapons from the Pakistan side especially is too high. It is very high. And so hopefully that will temper any kind of reaction from the Indian side when this comes to pass afterwards. When Pakistan does whatever it is that they're going to do. Point out these factors and just say, listen, Pakistan, I get it. Your national pride was hit with this. You have to defend yourself. I get it. But what you don't want to do is take action in retaliation that is so egregious that it fosters an unequal and then escalatory act on the other side of response, because this could spin out of control really fast. So you can't get into a situation. What I would advise both sides to do, whether there's a retaliation or whether there's not, each side has to recognize that you have a little border skirmish here. There's a lot of history of that in the past. It's never escalated beyond. There's a lot of border clashes in this area, even between China and India, for example. They have had a number of them over the years, but they have been relatively smart in recognizing that you can't get too far. Obviously, India and China have had some border clashes before, and they're both nuclear powers, and they managed to navigate away from this. So let us hope that that is the case with India and Pakistan here as well, that they can both recognize the cost to going much further than where they are right now is higher than either side would want to pay. And you just dare not get into a situation to where you risk a nuclear event where somebody actually uses nuclear weapons, because then I'm telling you, then the world is a different place. We'll never come back to where we are right here, because once that threshold is broken, it was one thing in 1945, we had a monopoly on it. Now we don't have a monopoly on it. And if one gets used now, it's going to have ramifications across the globe that are just too terrible to even contemplate. And that is something that we need to avoid at all costs. Everyone, the United States, China, Russia, the European Union. I mean, everybody needs to be working to get this thing tamped down really, really fast, because the ramifications for everybody else could be quite severe. Thank you very much. We appreciate you today. Also, to remind you that we have a really
1 second, John.
This is just being weird. I'm sorry. He is a Pakistani journalist. He is founder and editor of Pakistan Daily, and a former reporter for Pakistan's The News International. Hamza, man, welcome to the show. How you doing today? You doing okay?
Yes, yes, I'm fine. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. This has been a dramatic night. I'll tell you that. I watched warplanes from India hit Pakistan or areas of Pakistan. Watch Pakistan respond, blowing up seemingly some kind of Indian military facility. I'm trying to pull this up for the audience so they can see it for themselves. Apparently, Indian fighters were either shot down or crashed. I'm not entirely sure which. I'm seeing reports coming out for both. To put it mildly, these two nuclear powers have now exchanged heavy fire. What is the Pakistani argument in this? And what are they saying from their point of view? I know Pakistan went to the UN Security Council to try to get the UN Security Council to effectively, I guess, intervene in some way. They didn't really intervene. I know Russia and China were talking about being diplomats and trying to prevent this from taking place. Modi had already given license to this military to go after the people who were responsible for the attack in Kashmir. Now, I would imagine the Indian government is saying we are attacking targets that was related in some way to the attack and the murder of the 26 Indian citizens, Hindus, on our territory. Give me, what is the Pakistani take for this?
Well, last night's attack by India was unprovoked and unjustified. India targeted multiple civilian areas, so India did not target military installations. Over 30 people have died in Pakistan so far, with dozens injured, and Pakistan sees this as an act of war. Now, in retaliation to this provocation, the Pakistani Air Force shot down 5 Indian fighter jets, including 3 Rafale jets. The debris has been found, and it has also been acknowledged by the Indian media. So it's a very precarious situation overall. Now, just a few minutes earlier, Pakistan's National Security Committee also held a meeting in which they decided to give a befitting response to India. So currently, the aerial dogfight was just a retaliation to this attack, but the main response by Pakistan is yet to be seen. But since these are two nuclear powers, the world is calling on both nations to India to make any de-escalating measures, because so far they have initiated a war and it remains unclear on how things will unfold. But I do think with reasonable certainty it can be predicted that Pakistan will respond.
Wow. As you point out, there was, I guess, exchange of fire. India hit various targets. Pakistan responded. Pakistan comes out saying, okay, we can stop here if you want to stop here, if that's what you want to do. India is not going to accept that these were civilian targets. What India is going to say is we were going after terrorist targets that we believe were related in some way. And if they were civilians in an area, we understand, but ultimately what we were trying to hit were terrorists that were responsible for the killing of the Indian citizens. What do you say to that? I mean, do you take that as being a rational take that, yeah, we went after people, fair enough. There were civilians, we understand, but ultimately we were going after the people who were responsible in some way? Because I don't think India is looking at this from the perspective of we were attacking the Pakistani government. They're looking at it, we were attacking targets not related to Pakistani military installations, but to terrorist affiliations. Give me your take on that.
Well, so far, India has not provided a shred of evidence of Pakistani involvement in Pahalgam or in any other incident which they may claim is an excuse for their aggression. Now, even these locations, India has not shared any evidence with the international community or their own media, which suggests that these places were terrorist camps. It seems like a fiction created just to justify this provocation. But even if, for argument's sake, let's agree that yes, there might be some terrorist targets in those locations. If we reverse the situation, could Pakistan do the same? What if Pakistan says that there are terrorist camps in India and attacks in the heart of New Delhi or Mumbai or Goa or in other targets? How would that situation be? The world may not perhaps agree to such a unilateral and such an aggressive action, but now that India has opened this door for aggression, I think it is only natural and understandable that Pakistan's response will be proportionate. Now, Pakistan's strategic division has a policy of quid pro quo plus, which means that any aggression will be responded slightly more than what the aggression has happened by India. So now I think it is plausible, at least, that Pakistan will also target Indian cities, perhaps using the same rhetoric India is using, and justify their own military operations inside Indian territory.
Now, you are going to find this slightly comical in regard, because look, I agree with you on the military and the way that they speak about attacks, because they always put it through their frame of reference, and they would say these were precision, targeted, non-escalatory, and it's like, okay, dude, you're even if you feel justified in the attack, the idea that it's not escalatory is nonsense, right? But their point is, which is well, I'm not going to go for the cities, but the Ministry of Defense emphasized that the operations were, quote, focused, measured, and non-escalatory, deliberately avoiding Pakistan military installations and prevent further escalation. Quote, our actions have a focused, measured, non-escalatory nature. No Pakistani military facilities have been hit. India has demonstrated considerable restraint in the selection of targets and methods of execution. Said this was an official statement from the Ministry of Defense. What do you say to that? That from their point of view, look, we didn't hit any Pakistani military installations. So because we didn't hit anything associated with Pakistani military, then this should be, I guess, okay, I guess, in their minds. I don't know any state that would accept that, but fair enough. What is your take on that? I mean, their thing is we weren't going after Pakistan proper. We were going after terrorist elements in Pakistan. Let me ask you this. Do you accept that there are elements, that there are terrorist elements that are in various locations in Pakistan, and that those elements may have been associated with or responsible for the attack? And from India's point of view, we're not necessarily associating this with the Pakistani government, which is the reason why we didn't attack Pakistani military installations. We were going after terrorist elements in Pakistan that we believe were responsible for it. And so Pakistan is not being attacked in the proper sense of the word of the Pakistani government, but terrorist elements in Pakistan are. And the reason why I ask this, the US will make the same argument in Afghanistan. And look, I don't accept this argument in the US case, but they would say, we are hitting terrorist elements that are in these various regions that is doing X and Y. Now, the problem with the US is 70 to 80% of those people are civilians. We'll put that aside for the moment. We make a very similar premise when we are going for attacks in various regions, even in Pakistan, if I'm not mistaken. Do you accept that there are terrorist elements in Pakistan, that the Pakistani government doesn't necessarily have control, or at the very least, Pakistani government is saying we had no control over this? So, okay, so the Pakistani government doesn't have control over those terrorist elements, and that the Indian airstrike wasn't going after Pakistan proper. It was going after those terrorist elements that the Pakistani government says that they don't have control of. And look, you still may say that's still unacceptable. You're still going after Pakistani territory, and you haven't shown any evidence that this is coming from us. But give me your take on that argument, because that is their argument.
Well, I think this, if it had a shred of truth in it, evidence would have been shared with the international community, with India's own media, but this has not been the case so far. So far, what we have seen is that India has targeted Pakistani civilians. Our newsroom at the Pakistan Daily has seen pictures of dead bodies of women, of young children. They have been identified. Their funerals are currently ongoing. So I think the premise New Delhi is trying to build is totally based on a false narrative crafted to pacify their own domestic audience and their own domestic aims. But this is a very dangerous game New Delhi is playing, because now things are moving upwards in the escalation ladder, and Islamabad will respond and time of its own choosing. So earlier, Pakistan's defense minister also said that if Pakistani civilians aren't safe, then Indian civilians won't be safe either. If India feels that there are terror camps in Pakistan, which the Pakistani government has no control of, then the Pakistani government could also claim that there are terror camps in India, which could be the norm. The situation could further escalate. And right now, what we're seeing is that New Delhi has emerged as the aggressor in this regard. The international community is also, by and large, calling India out for this, unilateral act of aggression. Even the United States, the EU, other restraint, but the feeling in Islamabad and in entire Pakistan is that of not of mourning, but of anger. And this national anger will now translate into a befitting response. Already we have seen Pakistan's Air Force exert its aerial supremacy in the skies of South Asia. And Pakistani forces have downed over 5 Indian aircraft. But still, it seems that this response is still not proportionate unless Pakistan targets India inside their own territory, just like New Delhi did. I think this situation cannot be normalized. Diplomatic channels cannot succeed unless there is equality in the escalation ladder, unless New Delhi acknowledges its aggression against Pakistan, and unless the Pakistani people also believe that it is time to, call for peace, because right now war bells are ringing in both capitals.
Do you, in Pakistan in general, believe that Israel carried out a false flag and murdered 26 of its own civilians? Because I'm trying to understand. I got to be honest with you. I am not overtly familiar with with Pakistan and Indian politics. And so when I'm asking these questions, if they're stupid questions, forgive me. It's me trying to set up a context to understand it. 26 Indian civilians were murdered. And I guess the catch becomes, A, why did that murder take place? And was there some relationship with Pakistan in regards to the killing of these civilians? And I guess my question is, why would they set up a pretext by which to attack Pakistan? Like, what would be their rationale for it? What would be their motivation to do that and to initiate a war on some pretext of these civilians being killed if they weren't angered by these civilians being killed?
Well, okay, let me answer the first question first, that, whether this is a false flag attack or not. Frankly, I do not have enough information to answer this question. It could be a false flag. Both sides don't have enough to say something very substantive. But what we do know is that India has provided no evidence of Pakistani involvement. So far, with the information we have at the 7th of May, while we are talking, there is literally zero evidence of Pakistani involvement in this attack. Now, there are certain questions I myself have, which perhaps hint towards this incident being a false flag. My primary question is, why have these attackers not been arrested by now? How have they remained hidden in Indian occupied Kashmir when they're in that region? Is that a security failure, or is it something more sinister? And about the motivations of India to do something like this and to initiate a war with Pakistan, I think India has a lot of motivation to do something like this. And in South Asia and in the entire world, we see states sometimes behaving in a very weird way in order to achieve their political and diplomatic and military goals. So what we saw immediately after this attack, like minutes after the attack, we saw India blame Pakistan when enough information was not even there about how many people had died, who were involved. It's literally impossible to point blame on any party in a few minutes of such a big terrorist attack. So I think this needs to be considered by the international community on how India conducted the investigation of this attack. But in regards to India's motivations, so what India's first reaction to this attack was suspending the Indus Water Treaty. Now, this Indus Water Treaty was brokered by the World Bank. It created a water sharing mechanism by both countries because there are certain rivers which are shared between these two neighbors. So India wanted to opt out of this. Now, I think it could have been foreseen that if India suspends the Indus Water Treaty, Pakistan would suspend the Shimla Agreement, which holds the current line of control in Kashmir, which divides this conflicted region between both countries. So India could perhaps wanted a hot border, perhaps they wanted more military gains, perhaps they felt that their military was well equipped to deliver military geographical gains. So this could be a very strong motivation. And other motivation could be that India was having provincial elections in Bihar. So in order to capitalize on a stronger domestic political sentiment, in order for the BJP, the Indian ruling party, to gain political capital, I think such a scandal, serves them well. And right now, there's a very patriotic sentiment in both countries, and the ruling governments and the ruling parties do have extended political capital. Now, Pakistan is not having any elections, or Pakistan doesn't have a need for such kind of public perception manipulation. But India could very well do something like this in order to, manipulate the views of their own audiences. And these things have happened before, even in the Pulwama attack, when India blamed Pakistan and there was an aerial dogfight between these both nations. It happened just a few weeks before Prime Minister Modi's general election. So there is a pattern, there is a history, what Pakistan has called for. And I think the entire global community, by and large, is backing this demand of an independent investigation of how the Pahalgam attack was conducted. Why is New Delhi so against an independent investigation into this attack? These are some of the actions which raise suspicions of a false flag operation.
No, I agree with you. There should be an independent investigation, 1000%. I will tell you that governments they have a hyper-aggressive response when their own citizens have killed. I can tell you if that was the US, oh my God, the response by the US they would not wait for the investigation to come to a conclusion. So fair enough, agreed. It is a heavy burden for me to get to the assessment that they would murder 26 of their own. The US has plans like that. The CIA, for example, had a plan of killing civilians, simulated or real, in order to blame the Cuban government to provoke a war. So again, my context is America, which gives me a very dark context for some of the stuff. It's just a heavy edge. I would tell you that people I've also interviewed will point out and say, well, Pakistan has various divisions, and in order to bring the country together, they may be willing to do something like this with the notion of provoking a conflict, with the idea that within the context of that conflict, the country would rally behind the government, a government that is in crisis, with Imran Khan being prosecuted, with various factions in various parts of Pakistan that seems to be at war with the government. Meaning they would also come away with an assessment that, okay, well, Pakistan needed this also. And again, this is not me criticizing, this is not me. I don't have a dog in this. I'm on moon with this, and I'm trying to understand it from both sides. Just figure out to get more context on it, if that makes sense. So my questions aren't in an indictment. The questions are just honest questions. If indeed Islamabad is like, we need a balance, and that balance means we need to also attack into India. You know, India is not going to accept that, and they're going to respond in kind. So are we just moving up the escalatory ladder, or do you think the skirmish is enough where both sides can come together and say, oh, okay, we both got our licks in, we're putting this to bed, or you don't see this ending anytime soon? You see this continuing to escalate?
Well, so far, because just minutes ago, we saw Pakistan's National Security Committee hold an emergency meeting in which they did decide to respond to this Indian aggression. The Prime Minister of Pakistan and the cabinet have authorized the armed forces to conduct any operation as and when they deem fit. And Pakistan's military spokesman, the Director General of the Inter-Services Public Relations, Lieutenant General Ahmed Sharif Chaudhry, has also made it clear that Pakistan will respond at a time and place of its choosing. And I think when sovereignty is involved, when national pride is involved, when national unity is involved, Pakistan and Pakistanis will not compromise. And New Delhi and the entire world should not be misunderstood about Pakistan's intentions. I think each and every Pakistani citizen vows to defend their motherland. And after such a horrendous attack on Pakistani civilians, I think that the national sentiment is that there needs to be an appropriate response, because if there is not, then such a situation could happen again, and Pakistan's silence or yearning for peace could be considered as a weakness. And I think Islamabad cannot let that happen in these circumstances. And yes, if things rise in the escalatory ladder, I think it perhaps serves Islamabad, because it may be argued that Islamabad has much less to lose than New Delhi. Islamabad represents a much smaller economy, a much smaller population, and to be honest, geopolitically, New Delhi does pull more weight. So, you know, if this escalates further, it's only India's loss, because Pakistan is already a conflict-ridden country. We have tensions with Afghanistan. We don't have an ideal relationship with Iran. So even if we share a hot border with India and there's a prolonged conflict, the Pakistani forces are battle-hardened. India has not had a major war since a long time. Even recently, last night, we have seen how the Pakistani Air Force completely dominated the skies, and domination will escalate. And in regards to your earlier comment that, yes, you're right, if we are claiming that India may conduct a false flag, then yes, it always serves us if we look at the opposite side, that what if Pakistan did it for its own domestic political maneuvering or capital? Yes, that is a possibility. But in any analysis or in any hypothesis, I think what is most important is the evidence. I think that yes, international law should take its course, and any actor which supports terror should be held accountable. There can be no justification for terrorism in any context, but it should be impartial, it should be independent, and it should be acknowledged by both parties. But such unilateral actions signify bullying. And one thing, as a Pakistani, I can tell you, I'm a journalist, I'm reporting on this conflict, but the Pakistani nation will not be bullied. We aren't like that. We're a martial race, and we would prefer to die rather than to live with indignity. These are the sentiments of the Pakistani nation, and we are completely confident that our armed forces will represent our sentiments.
One last question before I let you go, and I appreciate you coming on. I really do, especially at the short time frame. Do you think that J.D. Vance being in India had anything to do with the timing of this? That seems like a hell of a coincidence that he's in India and then this takes place like a day later.
Well, you know, in these things, when I analyze such actions, I think there are no coincidences, and things can't just be too good to be true, or without a reason. So still, I don't say that correlation means causation.
Yes.
So it could just be a random occurrence, but the way New Delhi has dealt with this entire situation, the way they have been unable to capture the attackers, the way they are trying to stall an independent investigation, the way they took minutes to blame Pakistan, and the fact that the vice president of the United States was there. I think all of these circumstances just create a confusion or a doubt that what really transpired that fateful night in Pahalgam, and why hasn't India or the global community been able to find out the truth so far? It's been many days since it happened. If there was a national will represented by New Delhi, I have no doubt that these attackers would have been caught and held accountable. But what we have seen is that the attackers have not been caught and not been punished, but another country, which right now has nothing to do with this or has no evidence of their involvement, they have been attacked. So this perhaps leans towards a sinister motive, which Islamabad.
Dramatic, to put it mildly. Hazma Salam, thank you for this, man. I really do appreciate it, especially on short notice. Hazma Salam, he's a Pakistani journalist. He is founder and editor for Pakistan Daily and former reporter for Pakistan
Right, so Yemen's Ansar Allah movement, better known as the Houthis, have declared a complete aerial blockade of Israel. It's a bold claim, isn't it? But they reckon they can back it up and are touting further technological breakthroughs that they say means they can enforce this too. This announcement has, of course, followed their missile strike on Ben Gurion International Airport in Tel Aviv in the last couple of days, marking the first time a Houthi missile has successfully hit the main airport since the collapse of the Gaza ceasefire. Possibly its first definitive hit on it, full stop, though that largely depends on who you ask. This has, as you might imagine, though, had immediate and far-reaching consequences, not least for international aviation, as well as Israel's arrogance and military posturing. That's taken a bit of a beating as well. But also amongst Israeli internal political forces too, still preferring to blame Iran for everything the Houthis are actually doing. What began as a regional resistance movement on the part of the Houthis in support of Gaza has led to technological advancements already, from the cheap dinghies and drones they were known for to begin with, to improved military tactics and missiles that can reach far beyond the Red Sea, transforming the Houthis more and more into a formidable and technologically evolving force capable of challenging one of the world's most heavily fortified states. That such a group could mount an attack on Israel's main airport through all of Israel and its multi-layered air defenses and through American and Gulf-controlled airspace has challenged everything those Western and Israeli allied forces thought the Houthis were capable of, and they've all been found wanting as a consequence. Who genuinely would put it past the Houthis to be raising their game yet again? Right, so the Houthis and their ongoing military actions and all of that, and the evolution of their military persistence have all come as a direct response to Israel's ongoing war of atrocity in Gaza, all the atrocities, the genocide, which has escalated into what many international observers and human rights organizations describe as a campaign of annihilation, and what the International Court of Justice has, of course, deemed a plausible case for genocide. But none of it seems to have deterred Israel one iota. Far-right Israeli politicians have made increasingly incendiary remarks, such as Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich's recent call to seize or entirely destroy Gaza and displace its population in great numbers. And the world criticizes, doesn't it? It never steps in to do anything meaningful. Israel's not only bombed Gaza with extraordinary ferocity, but also implemented what has effectively become now a war of starvation, blocking all the humanitarian aid, targeting civilian infrastructure, and plunging the Strip into a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. And the images of malnourished babies and children show who the first casualties of these such war crimes always are. Now, with the Israeli cabinet moving to indefinitely seize and occupy the entire Gaza Strip, now they're saying the conflict has entered a particularly grim point in proceedings as we now move into the 19th month of this genocide. This is a time frame that marks a complete rejection of the two-state solution framework, as if Israel were ever really into it. And where before there was decades of apartheid, now Israel's moves, especially amid such genocidal rhetoric from far-right Zionist figures, are more akin to a final solution to purge the entire population of Gaza, or worse. But in state, they've done little to see that endpoint arrive. And now Gaza is facing full-scale annexation instead. The price of Western indifference. The Houthis and other regional resistance groups have interpreted this development not only as a war crime, but as an existential threat to Palestinian identity and sovereignty. And unlike the West, they do more than just talk about it and have increasingly become a bigger and bigger threat to the Israeli program. Where strikes from Yemen have been nothing new to Israel, there's no denying that the Houthis stunned the region with a missile strike that found its target near Ben Gurion Airport, reportedly causing some minor injuries and damaging property. For the Houthis, this was a milestone event, a demonstration that their long-range missile capabilities had evolved far beyond previous estimates. They quickly announced a full aerial blockade of Israel in response to this strike, vowing that no Israeli airport would be safe now, and having hit one, every airline now is going to know that. Now, according to Houthi sources in Sanaa, this successful strike was carried out using a newly developed missile and missile system. While they have not disclosed much more than that about it, the technical details, Houthi officials have also suggested that combined with this new weapon, they've another technological advancement to still show off, to go with it, to make sure their aerial blockade of Israeli airspace is successful, suggesting that whatever they've still got cooking up is designed to evade and neutralize existing air defense systems, of which Israel have several, as we know, including the Iron Dome, it's the best known one, but then there's David Sling, there's the Arrow systems, not to mention that US-built. These claims obviously remain to be seen about this next stage in Houthi technological advancement that will have to be independently verified if and when it happens. But this incident has already shown that Israeli defenses, even at their strongest point, which is around Tel Aviv, can still be breached. A comment posted onto Telegram citing a Houthi official who spoke to Al Mayadeen stated that a senior Yemeni source told Al Mayadeen yesterday that Yemen is on the verge of a qualitative leap in military capabilities, warning that no interception systems, regardless of their size or type, will be able to confront Yemen's missiles. The source said that the army has activated new missile systems and is ready to impose new equations, adding that the recent targeting of Ben Gurion Airport proves the precision of our weapons and that Israeli efforts failed to neutralize Yemeni capabilities or obtain a target bank. As striking as this hit on Ben Gurion Airport has been, and the shockwaves it has sent out, the Houthis appear to be claiming that this was merely a preview. They've warned of upcoming events that will reportedly demonstrate technological advancements powerful enough to make further Israeli airspace control impossible. They even predict these events will catalyze what they term reverse migration, which is pretty self-explanatory, really, isn't it? Where Israeli settlers, fearing the insecurity that's being caused, begin to leave the region in large numbers to return to their countries of origin. Of course, to do that, they might need planes to get on, of course. There might be an issue there. The implications of this aerial blockade, though, are already being felt in that respect. Following the missile strike, numerous international airlines, including Delta, British Airways, Wizz Air, Iberia, and Air France, suspended flight space is no longer safe for commercial travel. Some airlines were due to have restarted flights, but have instead extended the cancellation, leaving Israelis stranded abroad and indeed isolating Israel itself more and more. On economic and psychological warfare as well. By forcing international airlines, the Houthis are also showing that they can disrupt Israel's economic and logistical lifelines without even having to fire another rocket. Though I said before, and they continue to do so. So what does Israel have to say about all of this themselves that they readily put on show then? Well, their response to the missile strike and the subsequent blockade declaration have seen Israeli officials jumping to quickly blame Iran for it all, accusing it of orchestrating or at least supporting the operation. Yes, that old chestnut again. This is oh so predictable. The oh so familiar narrative. Please, Mr. Trump, won't you just bomb Iran for us already? It's the kind of narrative where Israel has long tried to portray everything negative that they are experiencing as manifestations of some sort of insidious grand Iranian master plan. Iran has nevertheless swiftly and unequivocally rejected all said accusations. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi has stated, according to Press TV, that Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi said on Sunday night that Yemen's decision to support the Palestinian people is an independent decision rooted in the Islamic nation's humanitarian and solidarity with Palestinians. The top Iranian diplomat pointed out that it is the US military that has entered into the war with Yemen in support of the Zionist regime's ongoing genocide against the people of Gaza. Araghchi slammed the US for committing war crimes by targeting infrastructure and civilian areas across Yemeni cities. He characterized the accusations as diversionary tactics aimed at deflecting attention from the Zionist regime's crimes in occupied Palestine, masking strategic failures and justifying further destabilization of the region. At the end, Araghchi condemned the US attacks on Yemen as a clear violation of the UN Charter and the fundamental principles of international law. In retaliation for the attack, Israel launched airstrikes on key targets in Yemen, because of course they did, including Sana'a International Airport, tit for tat, and Hadida Port, the usual targets, not necessarily Houthi in nature at all, just their best guess because of an ongoing dearth of intelligence on actual Houthi whereabouts. The United States has also conducted several airstrikes in Yemen under the pretext of targeting terrorist threats. However, resistance groups and Yemeni civil society organizations have, of course, condemned these attacks as unjustified aggression against civilians, and those US strikes might now be the last ones too. But that's another story I'll cover separately from this. Particularly severe round of US airstrikes, though, was launched on the port of Hadida, one of the few remaining lifelines for Yemen's already devastated civilian population, still recovering from the years of war with Saudi Arabia as they are. These attacks have, of course, drawn fierce criticism from across the region, with commentators highlighting the lack of strategic clarity from the Americans, which is when do they ever show any, frankly. Like everyone else, they're striking in civilian areas where they have no idea where the Houthis actually are. But the Houthis claim that their actions will lead to mass reverse migration. May sound like propaganda to some. Statistical data suggests that Israel is indeed facing a surge on immigration, as we would normally call it. According to recent figures, nearly 83,000 Israelis, inverted commas, left the country in 2024, which is a record-setting number. Many of these departures have been driven by fears of security deterioration, the political extremism of the Israeli government itself, and the economic impacts of the prolonged war on the country, as Israel's economy continues to tank even further. As Israel becomes increasingly more volatile internally, as it comes in for yet more criticism externally, its demographic future is beginning to look more and more uncertain. This startup nation for Zionists has become a fortress state now, one where growing numbers of young professionals and middle-class citizens are considering their futures being abroad and getting the hell out of Dodge. The Houthis' rhetoric taps into this anxiety somewhat. Their actions arguably even more so. They argue that as long as Israel continues its occupation of Palestinian lands and commits such barbaric atrocities in Gaza, no amount of supposed technological superiority on Israel's part will ensure its long-term viability. Whether or not their missile program can actually enforce a total aerial blockade will remain to be seen. But if a poor nation as Yemen is, with a military force that gets underestimated time after time, invariably to the cost of their opponents, like the Houthis can do, what they've done already, you don't feel confident betting against them, do you? The psychological effect of watching an expanding number of Israelis fleeing their homeland, inverted commas, has already taken root and can only grow with the direction Netanyahu is dragging the country in. From a strategic standpoint, Israel now faces a multi-front conflict, all of its own doing, of course, in a way that it has not had to deal with for decades, though. In addition to its operations in Gaza, it's still got to contend with the threat of Hezbollah in the north of Lebanon, whose patient threat from the south. There is Hamas in Gaza still. There are the other forces in the West Bank. I won't say Syria so much. Al-Sharaa only attacks his own people these days, not Israel for invading them after all. So what is Israel going to do about all of this then? What a mess it's in right now. An obvious move seems to be the continued military escalation against Yemen and increasing diplomatic pressure on the United States and Europe to try and further isolate the Houthis and their allies. Already, Israeli officials have ramped up calls for designating the Houthis as a terrorist organization more widely. But the US might have just walked away from that table now. Domestically, Israel may use this external threat to justify even more repressive measures against Palestinians and dissenting citizens. But frankly, with full plans to annex Gaza entirely now, where do they escalate from there? Certainly, how is this going to put the Houthis off one iota? Reacting like this, which seems predictable, will only deepen the crisis they're already in here. Military responses have failed to deter Houthi advances at all so far, and diplomatic isolation is unlikely to be effective against a movement that thrives on local legitimacy. The people of Yemen love them, support what they're doing, plenty of regional support, and global support increasingly these days as well, as the Houthis are seen to be the only force actually taking the fight to Israel. What we are witnessing is not simply a momentary escalation, but the unfolding of a whole new phase in the Israel-Palestine conflict, one in which non-state actors like the Houthis are increasingly taking center stage in it. They certainly operate outside of the traditional norms of state diplomacy and military engagement, but they are networked, ideological, and increasingly they're becoming more and more technologically capable. resistance is not just military either, it's psychological, it's also narrative. They are challenging Israel's right to operate as an unaccountable occupying power without consequence. And by doing so, it's opening the eyes of more and more people all around the world. By declaring an aerial blockade and striking one of Israel's most important and well-protected civilian infrastructures, the Houthis are effectively saying no more to business as usual, no more Israeli impunity. And if Israel chooses to escalate even further, it may find itself in a prolonged and unpredictable struggle with adversaries it can neither bomb into submission nor isolate diplomatically. The Houthis have forced the world to pay attention, not just to the missiles, but to the misery, the occupation, and the growing will to resist. It's only going to become all the more inexcusable for countries and heads of state who continue to choose to do nothing to stop it, therefore. For more on the events leading up to and the actual strike on Ben Gurion Airport itself, please do check out this video recommendation here as your suggested.
It is May 7th, 2025, and U.S. President Trump has announced that the U.S. is going to stop with Ansar Allah. Now he's claiming that the Houthis they're not going to be targeting American ships. They're still free to target Israel-linked ships and also Israel itself. And this deal comes after Ansar Allah previously offered to stop targeting American ships, saying that all the U.S. had to do was to stop bombing them. And now it looks like the U.S. is the one that is capitulating, if you will, as you have them in a position where the U.S. Navy just lost a second $60 million jet over the Red Sea. All of this comes as you have Yemen still in this place where they are continuing their support for the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, as Israel has now announced plans to quote unquote conquer Gaza. So what does that really mean, and where do tensions stand all around as we continue
Damn, real off.
Continue to follow the genocide targeting the Palestinian people. We got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier. So let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Laith Marouf, a Palestinian Syrian journalist and host of Free Palestine TV based in Lebanon. Laith, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Great to be with you, Rachel.
Yeah, it's good to have you on the show. And I want to get your take on the latest. And I want to start in Yemen, because I know that Trump declared on Tuesday that the U.S. would stop bombing Yemen, claiming that the Houthis, quote, capitulated and that they will not be blowing up ships anymore. Now, this, of course, comes alongside the news that the U.S. Navy lost a second $60 million jet in the Red Sea, with reports saying that the Houthis took a shot at it. And Ansar Allah offered to stop targeting U.S. ships previously, but as they have noted recently, there's nothing in this agreement that stops them from targeting Israel in support of the Palestinian people in Gaza, who are, of course, being targeted by both the US and Israel in an all-out genocide. So what is your reaction to this news? I mean, obviously, the US wasn't able to stop Ansar Allah's targeted blockade in the Red Sea. So was this deal kind of the Americans' only way out, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I watched that press conference of Trump, and clearly it conflicts with the actual agreement. He made it sound like it's Ansar Allah or the Yemeni government that was capitulating, when in reality, right now, Yemen can continue targeting any shipping going to the Zionist colony, and can continue to target the colony itself. The only thing that is agreed to stop targeting are American ships. And those wouldn't have been targeted if the United States didn't come to bombard Yemen on behalf of the Zionist colony. So in reality, this is a capitulation by the United States. And after a year of this back and forth between the Yemeni armed forces and the American Navy, it's clear that this is the most dangerous naval engagement that the U.S. had been involved in since World War II. And the American Navy has been used to since World War II of just bombarding people from afar, from the sea, and nobody shooting back at it. And now we know that we have in Ansar Allah, in the Yemeni Navy and military forces, a worthy opponent that forced the United States to withdraw. It's clear that this latest announcement of the F-18 again falling off deck, this is the funniest part. They can't even make up a story that makes sense. Yemen has, over the last year, been able to develop its own air defenses, its own hypersonic missiles and cruise missiles and drones. Throughout this battle, develop them further and further to get to this point that we see that the United States runs away and leaves the Zionist colony hanging in its fight with Yemen.
Yeah, and this especially coming after the latest exchange of fire between Yemen and Israel this week has been really interesting, when you see a missile coming from Yemen hitting at Ben Gurion Airport, because I'm looking at this and I'm going, okay, what is, and I don't know if it's one of those things where the Trump administration is finally figuring out the lesson they should have learned from Saudi Arabia in the US the first time around, and then they should have learned it from the Biden administration, which is you don't mess with Yemen and expect them to capitulate. And if we look at Ansar Allah, they've been very clear. They're like, the reason that we have this blockade is because Israel has a blockade on humanitarian aid going into the Gaza Strip. We know that the situation there is incredibly dire. And so all the US had to do was to tell Israel, okay, allow the humanitarian aid back in, but they refused to even do that. What do you make of what that tells us about how the US and Israel are handling this genocide and the fact that it is an all-out genocide, because the easiest option is the one that they refused altogether?
Yeah, I mean, the Zionist colony is left in a situation right now that if it stops this genocide, all the global efforts that have been focused on ending the genocide and getting aid through will be diverted towards bringing Zionist leadership into justice. This is the least of it. If there is a stop to the genocide right now, that this is what Israel is going to have to deal with on a global scale, it's also going to have to deal with the reality that the majority of humanity doesn't want to do business with it, doesn't even want Israeli tourists in their restaurants and in their hotels, and the tsunami will just flood the whole international scene. So, and that will eventually lead to shortages in supplies for the Zionist colony and so on. It will collapse, literally. The minute this genocide stops, it will be the beginning of the end of the Zionist colony. And therefore, they are left in this situation where they are, committing 100% to continuing this genocide in hopes that they can defeat the whole of humanity. It's getting to this crazy point. And I think what Trump had to deal with in the fight with Yemen is the pressures from the American Navy itself. The price was going to be very high, especially if a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier explodes, okay, and sinks. This is not a joke. So the United States, although it wants to bombard anybody and everybody on behalf of Israel, at that point, it got to be too much of a price. Look at the hypersonic missile that you mentioned that hit Ben Gurion Airport. This missile had the American naval group that was in the Red Sea, as well as the UK naval group that's there, as well as the Saudi and Jordanian and Egyptian and air defenses, and the 3 THAAD batteries inside the Zionist colony, and the Arrow and the David Sling, all of it. And it was a warning shot that purposefully hit an open field inside the actual airport fenced area. So the next shot right now, because the Zionists were stupid enough to destroy the Sana'a airport yesterday, and now that the United States is withdrawing from this fight, this opens the door for Sana'a to totally destroy Ben Gurion, and Sana'a has been for a while now calling for a
obviously Trump has been talking big for the last few months. But this does create hands on the ground. We know that they are not going to leave their land, that they are going to everything in them. We've seen that for the last 19 months. What are your concerns for where that situation stands right now?
Well, clearly the Israelis can continue genociding unarmed civilians. Even today, for instance, this morning, they bombed a shelter school 3 times. But at the same time, we saw an announcement by Hamas that they blew up a landmine field that they had put booby-trapped for a column of Israeli invading forces. And the Israeli media reported that there was multiple, if not like 4 or 5 helicopters that went down to take out the dead and injured. So we understand that the Israelis can bombard from air as much as they want and kill as many civilians as they can, but that doesn't, translate to their ability to control the ground. And they will try. They've been trying for 17 months. This is not the first time that they attempted to conquer and hold major parts of the Gaza Strip, and they failed every time. And now the Israeli military has a shortage of 100,000 soldiers that are not responding to their call-ins to do their service, and the Israeli military can't find them. So most of these people have just left the country. And the pool of international Zionists, like Canadian Jewish Zionists or American Jewish Zionists or British Jewish Zionists has been depleted. All of these people went in the beginning to participate in the genocide, and they went back with their psychological problems of participating in a genocide. You don't see them coming back again. How far can the Zionists achieve on the ground? I think nothing, but they can continue bombarding from the air and committing genocide. And as we see, they have expanded that genocide policy and the destruction into the West Bank. Noor Shams refugee camp outside Tul Karim, a quarter of it has been now ordered evacuated and is going to be destroyed. That's all what Israel can do.
Yeah, and as you're noting there, I mean, you look at the ways in which the Palestinians have resisted and they've survived and everything that they've been through. And I know when Israel talks about, okay, we're going to have this new occupation plan, and obviously the US is on board, right? Even if they're not actively bombing Yemen today, they are still providing plenty of supplies. And we had this talk about, I know that Trump is planning to visit the Middle East next week. He's supposed to go to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. And there's some talk about the possibility of a deal. But when I look at what the Trump administration has been doing in recent months, the fact that they've sent Israel all of these new weapons, made sure that they've had plenty of armored bulldozers. And when you look at the reports that the Israeli military is trying to call up tens of thousands of reservists, and maybe that's just to make sure that they're reinforcing their current numbers. But it doesn't seem to me like the US and Israel are looking at any kind of peace or looking at any kind of a possible deal. What is the message that those actions send to you as you're kind of watching this unfold?
Yeah, I mean, the withdrawal of the United States from the fight against Yemen, and it's basically leaving the Zionists hanging dry, is rattling the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Qataris, who have, hinted to starting a land invasion of Yemen for the last few months and have fought Yemen for so long. if the US doesn't come to the aid of the Zionists against Yemen, would it come to the aid of the Saudis or the Emiratis? I don't think they are on the hierarchy of supremacy and racism in the minds of those who rule the White House. I think these Gulf monarchs are way. This is why Trump has to go right now to speak to the Saudis and Emiratis and Qataris. Yes, especially that he's had to withdraw from the fight against Yemen. Imagine with all that saber rattling against Iran, can he actually fight Iran if Yemen can whip them like this way? So the results of what just happened in Yemen, I think people have not yet understood how long-lasting they're going to be. This is as crucial and dangerous to the imperialist order as was the fall of Damascus to the axis of resistance. Their footing was lost after the fall of Damascus for a while, and we still are feeling the effects of it today. For the next 3 months, we're going to be feeling the effects of the American defeat in Yemen and the ramifications of it on all the alignments in the region.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point to keep in mind. And I do think it's kind of being downplayed when we look at the situation in Yemen and how it's being reported here in the West, because they're just talking about Trump's statement and not going further into, okay, well, what did the deal actually say? What did Ansar Allah actually get out of it? Which is that they still get to support the Palestinians. Now, you mentioned the situation in Syria, and I do want to get into that because I have been kind of watching the way that this has played out. And it's also been interesting to watch the way that the public, and I think some of my viewers, and maybe this is just YouTube and the way that they're handling things, but I feel like a lot of times when I do any videos on Syria lately, the views are just gone, right? And it's like people have just scattered. They don't understand the importance, or they say, oh, we lost Syria. That's it. But when you look at what's happening with this new Al-Qaeda regime in Damascus, it is really important because you've got this guy, Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, I'll call him. I'm not switching over to his new name his name that the media is trying to make happen. But you have reports saying that the UAE is working on mediating talks between Jawlani's new regime and Israel aimed at normalization. Does that come as a surprise to you at all, given everything we know about Jawlani and kind of the purpose that he is playing right now in Syria?
Yeah, I mean, here in the street, they call him Julani instead of Jolani to show how much everybody really believes he's a Mossad agent. And, there is no record of his real name anywhere. And this is why the Israelis bombarded the civil registry and the passports authorities in Syria. The first day the Wahhabi death squads took over Damascus, they destroyed all of the national registry. If you don't have a passport currently that was issued before that, and or a national ID card, nobody knows that who's Syrian and who's not. So this is, what we hear about the Emiratis trying to make friends between HTS and Israel. This is propaganda because they're already friends from a long time ago. They're on the same team. Everything that the HTS is doing in terms of genocide against the Alawi, Shia, and Christians, as well as the beginnings of the genocide of the Druze that we just saw over the last week, is done under the order of the Zionists and the United States. Syria and its national identity is purposefully being destroyed. It needs to be fragmented. The country, if it is to forget its glory as a birthplace of Arab liberation and revolution and history of anti-imperialism all the way back to the Roman era, that can't happen if there is a continuity in the generations. They're trying to crush the Syrian people completely and make everybody just think about their own group and or neighborhood or area, and forget that national sense of identity. And for now, the Wahhabi death squads have free reign to do what they want. The Western media is, completely blacking out the story. Unfortunately, Syrian people and Syrian women and Syrian minorities are target to the same things that we saw happen by ISIS in Iraq 10 years ago. And there was more attention to that story. We don't know what's happening to the archival and archaeological record of Syria, which is all being looted and nobody's even talking about it. The oldest churches in the world, south and east of Damascus, in Malula and Sidnaya, have been depopulated. The Syrian population that spoke Aramaic, the language of Jesus, have been disappeared, and not one peep even from the churches in the world. So, this is the project that the Wahhabis and the Zionists combined, and America behind them, and the Turks, all of them have agreed on.
Yeah, and it's devastating to watch it play out in real time. And, I know we were talking about the kind of the state of the axis of resistance, the impact that the loss of a Syrian government, a central Syrian government that was actually on the people, has had on the axis of resistance. And, when you look at Giuliani right now and his death squads, all of his foreign mercenaries that he's rounded up, and then you look at the US and their response, the US is just wanting to make sure that they have control of those death squads, right? They're wanting to make sure that the guns are pointed in the quote unquote correct direction as far as Washington is concerned. Lastly, I just wanted to ask you, when it comes to the state of the axis of resistance today, how do you view it, and how do you view what it's up against in terms of the US, the Zionists, and what they're still trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, the axis of resistance had a huge blow with the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and the leadership of Hezbollah and the fall of Damascus. But we can see already, a recovery from that happening, specifically in Lebanon and in Iran and now in Yemen. And that chapter now, lessons have been learned from that. There's going to be as we saw, a huge change in how the parts of the axis of resistance are working in this battle. And I don't think Syria is a write-off. In fact, the genocide against specifically the Druze over the last week has changed a lot inside the country. And the genocide that preceded that in the coast also affected the opinions of the vast majority of Sunnis. And Al-Julani's days are numbered. There's going to be something, we don't know what. The United States, all it cares about right now in Syria is allowing the Zionists to destroy the military manufacturing base of Syria, not only all its air defenses and caches of weapons that the Israelis have destroyed already, but the factories and the scientific complexes that have allowed Syria to have this knowledge and capabilities, and to continue the ability of looting Syrian oil and gas, which hasn't stopped. The United States is still stealing all Syria's oil and gas, and HTS is fine with that as long as they're allowed to rape and pillage the country too.
Yeah, it's very telling what the U.S. is doing and what they are supporting. And I know that there is certainly a lot at stake here all around. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Laith Marouf, a Palestinian Syrian journalist. And thank you so much for your time and insight.
See you soon, Rachel.
If anything in this, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that subscribe to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. Subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over
Last night, I was the first one to report the real story behind Trump's claims on reaching a ceasefire deal with the Houthis or Ansarullah fighters of Yemen. If you remember, I was the first to report that Trump had not told us the whole truth. In fact, contrary to his claims, it was the US which had reached out to the Houthis, begging them to spare US ships in the Red Sea. I had also told you how Trump had thrown war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu under the bus by agreeing to let the Houthis carry out their attacks against Israel in solidarity with Gaza. You can watch my video here in case you missed it. Today, Trump went a step further. He called the Houthis brave and showered praises on them. Now, you know why I was saying in my last video last night that you cannot trust this guy. He is notorious for going back on his words and eat humble pie. And his tone today didn't suggest that he was someone who had an upper hand in the negotiation with the Houthis. Let me play Trump's clip first for you.
Well, we're going to take a look. We're going to take a look. But, we had really a very good, as you know, we had a very good outcome with the Houthis, and we honor their word. I mean, they made a commitment, and we dealt with other countries that was to them and their surrogates, and we honor all of their words. We'll see what happens, but I think, I believe that hopefully that's over with, and they'll leave the ships alone. Just leave those ships alone. But so we do. We take their word for it. It was, we hit them very hard. They had a great capacity to withstand punishment. They took tremendous punishment. And, you could say there's a lot of bravery there. That it was amazing what they took. But we honor their commitment and their word. They gave us their word that they wouldn't be shooting ships anymore, and we honor that.
Now coming back to Jantaka Reporter's journalism. Within hours of Trump's comments on reaching a ceasefire deal with the Houthis, we reported the real story by carrying the audio clips of one Abdus Salam, the chief negotiator from the Houthis side, who took part in the negotiation mediated by the Sultanate of Oman.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. كما يعلم الجميع أن اليمن منذ أن أخذ على عاتقه مساندة الشعب الفلسطيني المظلوم، وفي الجولة الثانية بعد منتصف شهر رمضان المبارك، عندما أعلن السيد القائد دخول مرحلة الإسناد بدءا بمحاصرة السفن الإسرائيلية من المرور بالبحر الأحمر، ثم بعد ذلك جاء العدوان الأمريكي وتطورت الأحداث أيضا في غزة. في هذه الجولة كان برسائل عبر الأخوة الأشقاء في سلطنة عمان يطلب أو يعتقد أنه بحمل أو من أن نقبل باستهداف غزة وفلسطين، وأن نتراجع عن إسنادنا وصريحا أن عمليات اليمن لا يمكن أن تتوقف، وهناك ظلم كبير وفادح بحق الشعب الفلسطيني المظلوم وحصار بإدخال المواد والغذاء إلى قطاع غزة. وتوقفت النقاشات بعد ذلك. قرر الأمريكي مطالبته عبر الأخوة في عمان تارة بعد تارة وصولا إلى نقاط لم نتزحزح عن موقفنا قيد أنملة كما هو واضح في موقفنا الآن. بعد ذلك وصلت الجهود التي بذلها وزير الخارجية العماني مع الأمريكان إلى أن تقبلوا الموقف اليمني باستمرار المساندة للشعب الفلسطيني. وموقفنا كان من البداية للأمريكان معلن عبر ما أعلن عنه السيد مرارا وما أسطرناه في مواقف كثيرة، أن الأمريكي حشر نفسه لإسناد الإسرائيلي في الاعتداء على اليمن، وأن موقفنا سيكون الرد عليه وعلى سفنه وبوارجه بحكم أنه هو من بادر بالاعتداء. فإذا توقف عن عدوانه هذا شأنه، نحن سنتوقف عن الرد عليه. أما ما يتعلق بموقفنا المساند للقضية الفلسطينية فلم يتغير ولن يتغير بإذن الله إلا بتحقيق الأهداف العادلة والصريحة والواضحة. وجاء الموقف العماني تتويجا لصلابة الموقف اليمني وفشلا صريحا وذريعا للعدوان الأمريكي الغاشم على بلدنا، واعترافا وقبولا بموقف اليمن المساند لفلسطين الذي هو مستمر، ونتيجة أيضا لفشل الضربات الإجرامية على بلدنا والتي كان من نتائجها الفشل الذريع الذي تحدث عنه الكثير من المتابعين بما فيهم الأمريكان بأنفسهم. ولذلك فهذا الموقف الذي يتجلى اليوم هو موقف يعبر عن صلابة الموقف اليمني، وجاء طلبا أمريكيا عبر الأخوة في عمان، ونحن موقفنا من اليوم الأول أن يتوقفوا عن هذا العدوان، ولا علاقة لهم بموقفنا المساند للقضية الفلسطينية لا من قريب ولا من بعيد.
That video went viral and is on course to clock close to 200,000 views within 24 hours on YouTube. Guess what? Many hours later, even the BBC was forced to carry an identical report on its website, and I'm not making it up. So did Al Jazeera. This is the power of honest journalism. And you people actually, who make our journalism so powerful by sharing our videos en masse. Let's first look at the BBC report on this topic. The headline by the BBC read, and I quote, "Houthis say US backed down and Israel not covered by ceasefire." End quote. That's BBC headline. In other words, the BBC is also saying that Trump has thrown Netanyahu under the bus, albeit by using different language. Its report further added, and I quote, "A senior Houthi official has rejected US President Donald Trump's claim the Yemeni armed group capitulated when agreeing a ceasefire deal, saying the US backed down instead. What changed is the American position, but our position remains firm," Chief Negotiator Mohammed Abdul Salam told Houthi-run Al Masira TV. End quote. It was Al Masira TV who Abdul Salam had spoken to after Trump made those audacious claims, and whose clips I had used in my previous report last night, within hours of Trump making those claims. But the question is, why did the BBC do a follow-up story which would be so detrimental to Israel? An entity it just doesn't want to anger. An entity that its army of journalists have been bootlicking. The answer lies in the reach of our journalism. My contacts in the BBC say that the editors simply couldn't ignore this fact after seeing the growing reach of our video. Although the BBC story didn't go into as much detail as I had delved into in my report, it nonetheless captured the broader sentiments of the story. And not to be left behind was Al Jazeera, whose headline also read, and I quote, Yemen's Houthis say attacks on Israel not in US ceasefire deal in any way, end quote. And its report further added, and I quote, a ceasefire deal between Yemen's Houthis and the United States does not include any operations against Israel. The group's chief negotiator has announced. Mohammed Abdul Salam told the Reuters news agency on Wednesday that attacking Israel in any way, shape, or form in the agreement mediated by Oman, end quote. Isn't it amazing that what I could achieve being a one-man army, the likes of the BBC with billions of pounds of annual budget at its disposal and over 20,000 staff, could only achieve many hours later. There are reports that Trump was forced to seek peace with the Houthis following the Saudi intervention. Apparently, according to those reports, MBS didn't want the bombing next week. But I do not give credence to this theory. Why? Because why would MBS bother about the bombing of the Houthis? It was his country. In fact, it was him on whose instructions Saudi Arabia ravaged Yemen for many years by dropping tons of bombs. If MBS had any power and concern for human suffering, he would have long used that to convince Trump or Israel to stop the slaughtering of Palestinians in Gaza. He hasn't done that because he simply doesn't have that ability. In fact, that's my real gripe. Neither MBS nor anyone across the Gulf region have any power to wield over Israel or America. That's why I call them slaves. They have mortgaged their self-respect in exchange of lavish lives. Them all and live lavish life. But who cares if millions of fellow Arabs are being butchered? In fact, I won't be surprised if Saudi Arabia soon announces restoring relationship with Israel. I can't trust them. You only have to go by their stance or their action, not too much in the past, in just last 2 years, 18 months to be precise, to understand the real face of these cowards, these slaves. Anyway, as I said, you haven't heard the last word on this story, and I promise to keep you posted as and when new developments take place. Thank you very much for your support of this platform and our journalism on buymeacoffee.com and Patreon. If you too think that our journalism is worth supporting, then you too should consider becoming part of it. Details are there in the description of this video. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. This ain't running too slow, y'all. Coffee. Follow me.